That night on the Tonight Show stage, Nicole Kidman stopped mid-sentence, rose from the couch, and walked into the audience without saying a word. Jimmy Fallon watched her go. She had been speaking, warm, composed, exactly the person the audience had come to see, and then something in the crowd had pulled her gaze, and something behind her eyes had shifted, and she was moving before anyone understood that she was moving. Jimmy's mouth opened and stayed open. His hands lifted slightly from the desk. A gesture that belonged to no category, not a greeting, not a signal. Just the involuntary movement of a person whose body has registered that something is happening before his mind has caught up. Nicole Kidman moved down the steps from the stage and into the aisle with the absolute focus of a woman who has seen exactly one thing in a room full of things. The band fell silent, one instrument at a time. Jimmy Fallon stood behind his desk and could not speak, and 300 people held their breath as Nicole Kidman stopped in front of a woman in the 7th row and placed both hands very carefully on either side of her face. It was a Thursday night taping. September 2024. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Nicole Kidman was the guest, promoting a new film. One of the most celebrated actresses of her generation, arriving at the peak of a career that had never once plateaued. She had walked out to the kind of reception that belongs only to people who have earned it over decades. Sustained, warm, personal. The applause of an audience that feels they know her, and they did, in the way that audiences know people who have given them 30 years of their most interior performances. The interview had been electric from the first exchange. She was funny and precise and occasionally devastating in the way she chose her words. Everything was right. Everything was flowing. Jimmy was loose and delighted. The cameras were locked in, and then Nicole Kidman turned her head slightly toward the audience during a laugh, and her face changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. The change moved across her features the way a weather system moves. First in the eyes, then through the jaw, then into the stillness that replaced everything that had been animated a moment before. She stopped laughing. She stopped speaking. She looked at one fixed point in the 7th row. And then she stood up. Not a voice, not a sound, just a face in the crowd. Old, still watching with an expression that contained something Nicole Kidman recognized from a long time ago, from a place far from this studio, from a version of herself that the woman in that chair had known before anyone else did. Jimmy leaned forward. "Nicole, hey." She didn't answer. Her hand rose briefly to her chest, one finger pressed flat against her sternum, the way a person checks that something is still there. Then she walked off the stage. The entire studio froze. The director in the control room said nothing. The audience sat in the particular silence that descends when 300 people simultaneously understand that what they are watching is not part of the show. Was she all right? Had she seen something upsetting? Was this grief or shock, or something no one in this room had the context to name? The audience watched Nicole Kidman move down the aisle and stop and place her hands on either side of an old woman's face, and the old woman closed her eyes. And then Nicole Kidman said a name so quietly that only the front rows heard it, but her microphone caught every syllable. Ruth, just that. Ruth, to understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1983. Nicole Kidman wasn't always Nicole Kidman. Icon and legend, two-time Oscar winner, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. In 1983, she was 16 years old, living in Sydney, studying drama at the Phillip Street Theatre with the intensity of a teenager who has already decided that this is the only thing and is simply waiting for the world to confirm it. She was tall and angular, and not yet comfortable in the particular body she had been given, and she carried herself with the self-consciousness of a girl who has been told she is unusual, looking often enough to believe that unusual and wrong might be the same thing. She was talented. Everyone who saw her work knew it. But talent at 16 in a suburb of Sydney is a private fact, and private facts do not pay for drama classes or keep the doubt quiet at 3 a.m. Her mother enrolled her that year in a Saturday morning acting workshop run out of a church hall in Northbridge. It was not prestigious. The chairs were folding metal, and the floor was linoleum, and the heating worked only in theory. The workshop was taught by a woman named Ruth Hensley, who was 61 years old, recently retired from 28 years of teaching secondary school English, and who ran the Saturday class entirely without payment because she believed, with the particular stubbornness of a person who has spent a lifetime around young people, that the ones who needed to perform needed somewhere to do it that did not cost their families money they did not have. Nicole Kidman walked into that church hall on the first Saturday in March 1983, sat down in a folding metal chair, and did not look at anyone. Ruth Hensley looked at her for a long time before she spoke. What she said was not a compliment. It was not an introduction. Ruth Hensley walked across the linoleum floor, sat down in the chair directly beside Nicole, and said, "You're holding yourself like an apology. Stop that." Nicole looked at her. Ruth looked back with the calm directness of a woman who has been in rooms with frightened young people for 3 decades and has never once found it useful to pretend the fear isn't there. "You have nothing to apologize for," Ruth said. "You haven't done anything yet." It was the first time in Nicole Kidman's life that someone had named the posture before addressing the talent. It was the first time someone had looked at her self-consciousness and treated it not as a flaw to be corrected, but as a misunderstanding to be resolved. She straightened up in her chair. She did it without thinking, the way the body responds to truth before the mind agrees to it. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that, for 14 months every Saturday morning in that linoleum-floored church hall in Northbridge. Nicole Kidman sat across from Ruth Hensley and was taught what no drama curriculum had thought to include. Not technique, not projection, not the mechanics of a scene. Ruth taught her the specific and unteachable thing that separates a performer from an actor. How to be looked at without flinching, how to stand in the full weight of another person's attention and not diminish yourself to make them comfortable. How to take up the space you were given without apologizing for its dimensions. She was not gentle about it. Ruth Hensley had no interest in gentleness as a pedagogy. She was precise and occasionally blunt and entirely without condescension. And Nicole Kidman, who had spent her adolescence being treated as either too much or not quite right, discovered in those Saturday mornings that the most powerful thing a person could offer her was the refusal to manage her. Ruth did not manage her. She simply showed her what she was looking at. In May of 1984, during the last session before the winter break, Ruth brought a camera. A small handheld thing borrowed from her nephew, and filmed a short improvised scene. It was nothing formal. Just Nicole and another student, a boy named Patrick who was 17 and wanted to be a director, working through a scene Ruth had written by hand on a yellow legal pad. After, Ruth played the footage back on a small television she had wheeled in on a trolley. She paused it at one specific frame and turned to Nicole without ceremony. "That," she said, "that is what I have been trying to get you to understand about yourself for 14 months. Look at your face." Nicole looked. She has never fully described what she saw in that paused frame, but people who were in the room that Saturday morning would later say that something settled in her, the way a long-held breath finally releases. Ruth kept the tape. She told Nicole she was keeping it. She said, "One day you will want to show this to someone, and I will still have it." Nicole Kidman left for Melbourne that summer for her first professional audition. She got the role. She kept going, and the world kept agreeing with what Ruth Hensley had seen on a Saturday morning in 1983, in a church hall with folding metal chairs and theoretical heating. The decades filled with everything that decades fill with. The films. The roles. The name that became larger than any single performance. Nicole Kidman moved through the world her talent had built, and she thought about Ruth Hensley at the particular moments when thinking about someone means the most. The first Oscar nomination. The morning after the first win. The days when the self-consciousness she had been carrying since adolescence came back in the quiet hours, and she had to remind herself of a woman who had once told her she was holding herself like an apology. She tried to find her. 3 times across 20 years, through the ordinary channels of a person who has resources but not information, management inquiries, old address searches, a message left with the Phillip Street Theater that was never returned. Ruth Hensley had left no digital trail. She had retired from everything, the workshop included, sometime in the mid-90s. She had simply gone quiet, the way private people go quiet, with no announcement and no forwarding address. Nicole Kidman did not stop looking. She simply ran out of places to look. Ruth Hensley was 82 years old now. She had lived alone in a small house in Fremantle for 19 years since her husband passed. She had a daughter in Brisbane who called on Sundays. She had a vegetable garden that she tended with the focused satisfaction of a person who has found an adequate replacement for work. She did not own a computer. She had watched Nicole Kidman's films, every one of them, at the cinema alone, in the way that private people honor things privately, without telling anyone what the watching cost them. 6 months ago, Ruth's daughter had been clearing a shelf in the Fremantle house and found, in a cardboard box beneath a folded tablecloth, a VHS tape with a date written on the label in blue pen. May 1984. The daughter had no context for the tape, but something about her mother's expression when she saw it being held made her understand that it mattered. She did what daughters of a certain generation do when they find something they don't understand. She posted about it. A photograph of the tape, the date, a brief explanation of where it had come from, a question about whether anyone knew how to find the person it might belong to. The post found its way, through the particular pathways of the internet, to someone on Nicole Kidman's team within 72 hours. A call was made to Fremantle. Ruth answered on the 3rd ring. The Tonight Show producers knew only that a guest of Nicole's had been arranged in the audience, and that Nicole had asked for one specific thing, that no one tell Ruth where she would be sitting until the cameras were already rolling. Behind the scenes, Nicole Kidman had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. She had declined the pre-show briefing entirely. She did not want to know which row Ruth was in, which seat, which side of the house. She wanted to find her the same way you find someone in a room when you are genuinely looking, with your own eyes, on your own time, without being directed. The producers had exchanged looks and said nothing, because the request had the quality of a thing that was not actually a request. She had also asked that the tape, transferred now to digital, a small USB drive wrapped in a piece of paper with Ruth's handwriting on it, be placed in Jimmy Fallon's desk drawer before the taping began, to be given to her at whatever moment Jimmy judged right. She had told Jimmy everything. He had listened without interrupting. When she finished, he had sat quietly for a moment, and then said, "I'll know when." He had slid it across the desk 12 minutes into the interview, during a pause that followed a laugh, when the room was warm and open and something in Nicole's energy had shifted from performance into the particular register of a person who was waiting. She had looked at it, Then she had looked at the audience, and she had found Ruth Hensley in the 7th row looking back at her, with the expression of a woman who has been looking at her, in one form or another, for 41 years. Now in the aisle, Nicole held Ruth's face in both hands, and Ruth's eyes were closed, and the studio held its silence with the careful attention of people who understand they are witnessing something that does not belong to them, but that they have been trusted to hold. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Nicole Kidman reached into the pocket of her jacket and took out the USB drive, still wrapped in its piece of paper with Ruth's handwriting on the label. She pressed it into Ruth's hands. Ruth looked at it. Her fingers moved across the paper slowly. She recognized her own handwriting, and something in her face opened in the way that faces open when the past becomes suddenly, physically present. "You kept this," Nicole said. Her voice was low and slightly unsteady. "You told me you would." Ruth's hands were trembling slightly around the small object. "I told you one day you'd want to show someone," Ruth said. Her voice was dry and precise and entirely Ruth, the voice of a woman who does not perform even in the moments when performance would be forgiven. "Have you decided who yet?" Nicole Kidman laughed. It was not a composed laugh. It came from somewhere unguarded, and it broke the tension in the room like a window opening. And the audience released everything they had been holding in a single wave of sound. "I was just a teacher," Ruth said, when the room had quieted again. "A Saturday morning teacher in a cold hall. I didn't do anything extraordinary." Nicole looked at her steadily. She spoke with the unhurried weight of a person delivering a verdict they have been considering for 41 years. "You showed me what I looked like when I forgot to be afraid. You have no idea what that was worth." Ruth closed her hands around the USB drive. She pressed it against her chest. She looked at Nicole Kidman with the expression of a woman who has been right about something for a very long time and is only now being told so. Jimmy Fallon had not returned to his desk. He was standing at the edge of the stage with one hand over his mouth. And he was not trying to recover himself, and the audience understood that they did not need him to. Questlove had set his drumsticks down on the snare very gently, as though noise would disturb something. A camerawoman in the far aisle had lowered her camera to her side. The director in the control room had told his entire team the same thing at the same moment. Just hold. Nicole Kidman sat down in the empty seat beside Ruth Hensley in the 7th row of the Tonight Show studio and did not get up for 11 minutes. They spoke quietly, too quietly for the microphone to catch, and no one moved to fix that. Ruth Hensley flew back to Fremantle the following morning. Her daughter was waiting at the airport. Ruth handed her the USB drive in the arrivals hall without explanation, and her daughter, who had been the one to find the tape on the shelf, understood immediately what she was holding. The footage from May 1984, Nicole at 16, mid-scene, in the moment Ruth had paused and said, "Look at your face," was watched that night in a small house in Fremantle by 3 generations of Ruth's family. Ruth watched it once, from her chair by the window, and said nothing when it ended. Her vegetable garden is still tended every morning. She still does not own a computer. Her daughter calls on Sundays, and the calls are longer now. Nicole Kidman has spoken about Ruth Hensley in every major interview she has given since that September night. Not at length, not with ceremony, but as a fact, she has decided to stop keeping private. In her dressing room there is now a single framed photograph, a woman and a girl in a church hall in Northbridge, 1983, captured by a student with a borrowed camera during a break between exercises. The girl is sitting in a folding metal chair. Her back is straight. Some people teach you what you know. The rarest ones teach you what you are.